My name is Julyo, and in this video I want to talk about one of my main guitars, the Gibson ES-350. This one in particular is from 1952. The Gibson ES-350 is one of the most important transitional moments in Gibson history and probably in electric guitar history. Is the bridge between the pre-war jazz archtop world and the modern electric guitar era. This one in particular, which is 1952, has a set of P90, but we're going to go into the technical details in a little bit. First, I want to give you a high-level historical overview of this incredible instrument, which is a piece of history, but at the same time retains a unique sound which is really hard to recreate nowadays. The historical context of this 1952 ES-350 sits right in between after the post-war Gibson innovation period, which is basically after 1947. The ES-350 was introduced in 47-48 at Gibson Kalamazoo factory as a luxurious cutaway evolution of the early ES-300. Now you need to think that at the time you had jazz guitarists needed to have a louder instrument, big bands were evolving, amplification was becoming essential, and Gibson was transitioning from purely acoustic carved archtops into amplified professional instruments. In a sense, the ES-350 became Gibson's first major Venetian cutaway electric archtop. The Gibson ES-350 belongs to that golden era of Gibson ears, before the humbuckers era, before the ES-335, extremely known especially in the jazz and blues world, before the center blocks, before the thin lines became dominant. This is still fundamentally, basically an acoustic jazz box designed for electric amplification. In my opinion, what makes the ES-350 special, in particular the ones that are between 1952, 1953, 54, is that the model has matured into one of Gibson flagships of professional electric jazz guitars. So basically we're transitioning for the 300 from the ES-300 into the ES-350, and the guitar started to be heavily featured into the professional circle of jazz and big band musicians. Now the construction is pretty unique, and the measurements of the body are sometimes hard to fit into contemporary hard cases. You might need to purchase a custom-made hard case if you own one of these guitars, but just as a reminder, we're talking about a 17-inch laminated maple hollow body, a very deep body, a mahogany neck, a rosewood fingerboard, a pretty long scale, 25 by 5 scale, a Venetian cutaway, which is a signature, a natural cellulose lacquer finish, parallel bracing, floating rosewood bridge, and a trapeze tailpiece. I like to think about the long scale of the ES-350 almost as a piano-like extension. It has this stronger attack, has more knot separation, and has that unique acoustic projection that mostly belongs to acoustic guitars. Now, this part is in particular what makes this guitar sound so incredibly articulate for chord melody and single note jazz playing, especially combined with P90s. You have a sound that is not as thin as a single coil, not as aggressive as a humbucker, but is sitting right there, extremely round and present. So you can play very simple single line melodies, and you're going to deliver a consistent, strong and defined sound. This guitar comes from the pure P90s era. P90s are these pickups that they don't have to be confused with the soapbox pickups, because the P90s, they're there, you can't raise them, you can't lower them, they're just sitting on the body of the guitar. In particular, in this case, we need to think about that the P90s were introduced by Gibson in 1946-47, and by 1952, the P90s were Gibson flagship for electric pickup, basically the top, before humbuckers replaced them later on around 1956 and 1957. Now, in this ES-350, what represents the unique sign is the final mature expression of this almost single coil jazz tone, but again, without that thin sound that is often associated with single coil pickups. Another very interesting historical point about ES-350s is that historically they sit in between the introduction of the ES-175, the Birdland, the ES-350T, which stands for thin, the ES-5, and then eventually into the ES-335 line. Now, the ES-350T later on became associated with great artists like Chuck Berry, the early rock and roll, and the transition into thin line electric guitars. So this guy is almost the godfather of all the modern Gibson guitars, which will later on be popularized by rock and roll musicians and also country musicians. Now, if I'm not wrong, Kenny Burrell used to play one of these guitars, and there is also one of these guitars with a Charlie Christian pickup on the cover of one of his albums. And just to give you an idea, this guitar is the equivalent of playing almost an acoustic guitar, which is kind of like transitioning into becoming an electric guitar. Now, why do I particularly like ES-350s from that period? Well, because if I compare this guitar to an ES-175, then the ES-350 has a bigger sound, more open, more acoustic, and a lot less compressed. If I compare this to an L5 CES, then we're going to have something which is more woodier, more bluesy, and with a really, really immediate attack. And then if I have to compare this one to a classic Gibson with humbucker pickups, then I'm going to get a lot more attack and that unique air, that unique openness that sometimes is not really present in Gibson guitars like Les Paul with humbuckers, which can definitely get that aggressive attack, that presence, but sometimes is missing that thin air sound, which makes it extremely open. If you think about artists like T-Bone Walker, if you think about the early electric jazz, thinking about jump blues, bebop transition period, and also the early R&B, then you can get those sounds from this guitar. You can get sounds that are very jazzy, or sounds that are more associated with the likes of Chet Atkins. It's kind of like country, a little bit even almost harsh, but at the same time without having that abrasive, almost like weird sound that you get from some of the old Telecaster guitars. But don't get me wrong, I love Telecaster guitars, but this guitar has more body than a lot of Telecasters, and it works especially well if you want to get into the realm of country jazz, country bluegrass, but obviously you won't replace the country sound of a Telecaster of a Gretsch guitar. Sonically, I like also to think about, again, the likes of Barney Castle, Wes Montgomery, also Charlie Christian, the proto blues electric sophistication that you get when you're playing chords melody, when you like to do octaves, blues phrasing, but also if you want to have a sort of cinematic jazz, if you want to put a really nice analog reverb on this guitar. It will work magic because it will pick up all the expressive sound that you can get mostly only while playing fingerstyle. Now, you can play with pick, you can play with fingers, but the interesting thing is that the sound of the original P90s mixed with the body of this guitar creates that unique mix of woodiness and hairy sound that will get you really, really far if what you're looking for is an ambient, dark blues or jazz sound. There are many ES-350s around, and this guitar is 95% original, except for the tuners. There's some work being done on the knobs, the controls, the volume, obviously the setup, and the body is being restored. But in general, in particular in this case, we retain the original P90s. We have the original tailpiece, classic sunburst, vintage headstock inlay, the tuners, the part of the tuners at the top, it's original, and then it's a strong top flame grain on the front of the body, and also the overall period aesthetic is fully kept in its own integrity. Now, the instrument also is extremely healthy, is visually balanced, so it didn't have any crazy customization. It has been professionally maintained throughout the years, talking about something which is 70 plus years old and is still extremely high resonant. So it's not a guitar for collectors, it's a guitar to be played, to be carried on stage, performed, and to explore all the different sounds that you can get out of the amazing fretboard and those incredibly authentic sounding, unapologetic P90s. This guitar is not really popular among collectors. ES-350s, 1952, they're not really popular, but they should, because the production lasted less than a decade. So it was like 1947, 1956, and many examples of the guitar were heavily modified throughout the years. So it's kind of hard to find something that retains aesthetically, sound-wise, and also construction-wise as much as possible from the original period when they were built. Just like many of the electric guitars that were produced before the 60s, there is that aura of magic, that aura that makes this instrument almost feeling alive, feeling like there is its own personality, and it almost takes control sometimes of the way you're playing, which is very interesting because it will take you into a certain direction when maybe you're not sure if you want to play a certain melody in a certain way, and you're asking yourself, can I do this? This instrument will open worlds. To me, it really showed me the fact that acoustically will bridge two worlds that I love, which is the world of acoustic instruments and the world of electric instruments. In my background being classical guitar and acoustic guitars, I lean more towards that open, warm sound of acoustic instruments, where I can feel the wood, I can feel the authenticity of the sound not being changed or altered or sophisticated by the amplification, by the electric pickups. I like something that I can bring on stage and will somehow feel like putting a microphone in front of the guitar. Obviously, playing this guitar live comes with challenges, because we're talking about a pretty wide hollow body guitar, which is leaning towards feedbacks, and certain frequencies might clash with the acoustic of the venue. So it is essential, and we're going to see this in a different video, to have the right gear paired up with this guitar. If you're going to get this guitar and plug it straight into an amp, you can do that, but you need to be able to master the right angle when you're playing the guitar. Make sure that you know the venue and the stage that you're playing. Otherwise, you're gonna have a lot of feedback. You're gonna have weird sounds. Maybe when you're playing half away on the neck and you're doing a solo, and then you get bothered by certain frequencies that are resonating in an expected way. So, just like an acoustic instrument, just like playing a Stradivari on a violin, you need to know the acoustic of the venue you're playing at. If you're playing this in a studio, it's a completely different deal. If you're playing at home, it's a different deal. It's fine. You're not gonna have any issues. If you're bringing this in a jazz club or in a big stage, you need to know what you're doing. Potentially, if you are unexperienced in archtop guitars, I think the best investment that you can do is to hire a sound guy or a guitar tech that knows about vintage archtop guitars. They'll tell you how to handle the amps, where to play on stage, where to stand, and they're gonna give you all these little details that are literally feedback killers. So they'll save you a lot of time, a lot of frustration. Look at people like Pat Metheny. He's been playing archtop guitars for practically almost his career, and he has learned to play at a low volume on stage by trial and error, and also having the right combination of amps and angles so that his guitar sounds always clean, his music is very powerful, but at the same time is not muddy and confused. And this comes with experience. So if you want to venture into the hollow body world, be prepared, because it's a completely different deal from solid body electric guitars. Now, stay tuned, because I'm gonna do a rig rundown soon. And make sure to document a gig where I'm gonna use this guitar live to show you the challenges and how to deal with feedback, dead spots, and unwanted frequencies on stage with an archtop guitar, in particular with a vintage 1952 Gibson guitar. Stay tuned. Ciao for now.